What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the FantasyPros YouTube channel. My name is Lucas Wencl, and today we are talking about 10 players that you should be looking to stash ahead of the Week 11 slate and ahead of next week's waiver run as well. Before we dive on into that list of players, though, you can take the guesswork out of waiver wire decisions with FantasyPros Waiver Assistant. It will give you instant analysis on potential moves from over 100 fantasy experts. You'll also discover both the weekly and rest of season impact for every waiver ad. All you have to do is visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Again, all you have to do, visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app to optimize your roster today. Kicking off our list this week is Arizona Cardinals running back Trey Benson, who's rostered in 18% of leagues. Through the first 8 games this season, Trey Benson was averaging only 2.1 fantasy points per game. Over the last 2 weeks, though, Benson has scored double-digit fantasy points while finishing as a top 24 running back in both games. I wouldn't bank on that streak to continue coming out of the team's Week 11 bye, but I am interested in the Cardinals' rest of season schedule. They get favorable matchups with the Seahawks twice, the Patriots, and the Panthers in 4 of their next 5 games. This is the point in the season, too, where we want to make sure our handcuffed running backs are stashed. It would be a shame if James Conner, who's a top 10 fantasy running back on the season, were to get injured down the home stretch and you didn't have his backup stashed. Most managers won't even be thinking about Benson since he's on bye this week, so now is your time to swoop in and stash him before they realize. Our second stash this week is Mike Williams, a wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who's rostered in 18% of leagues. Big Mike made his debut with his new team in Week 10, but only ran 7 routes on 9 snaps. However, Russell Wilson launched him a last-second moonball under pressure and dropped it in the bucket for a 32-yard touchdown. The Steelers desperately need another competent wide receiver like Mike Williams, and we should see him get more involved as he gets more acclimated to this offense. The Steelers also get a phenomenal schedule to close out the season, getting all of the Ravens, Browns, and Bengals twice in 6 of their final 8 games. Your league mates may just see one lucky target falling Mike's way for a touchdown last week, but there's potential value to be had here going forward, especially with how well Russell Wilson has been playing. The next player to consider stashing is running back Blake Corum of the Los Angeles Rams, who's rostered in 16% of leagues. Corum has given you absolutely nothing to write home about this year, averaging only 2.2 fantasy points per game. However, just like Trey Benson, we want to make sure to have our high-value handcuff running back stashed. Part of the reason people drafted Corum this year was because they assumed he'd have a role alongside Kyren Williams, but the other reason is that people were concerned Kyren couldn't stay healthy. Now is the time to take action on that concern when it matters most in the fantasy football season. I doubt Corum will get worked in more after Kyren's second fumble of the year against the Dolphins last week, but if anything does happen to Kyren, Corum is going to be the hottest waiver wire ad, so we can stay 3 steps ahead of your league mates by getting him stashed now. Another handcuff running back you should look to stash is Cam Akers of the Minnesota Vikings, who's rostered in 14% of leagues. It's very clear at this point that Cam Akers is the clear backup to Aaron Jones in this Vikings offense, because we got a snippet of proof of that on Sunday when Aaron Jones had to be carted off the field. Somehow Jones found his way back, but we saw Akers take over as the primary back, getting 13 carries on the afternoon while running 11 routes. The production was nothing to write home about. He averaged only 2.9 yards per carry and didn't find the end zone, but what we learned might be just as valuable. If anything happens to Aaron Jones rest of season, Akers is confirmed to be in line for the 1A role in this backfield. We all know Aaron Jones doesn't have the best track record of staying healthy, so stash Akers now, especially if you're the Aaron Jones manager in your league. If the quarterback position is looking bleak on your team, stash Drake Maye of the New England Patriots, who's rostered in 13% of leagues. The matchups aren't strong for Drake Maye down the stretch, but when he can finish as a quarterback 16 against the Chicago Bears defense that has been giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks this year, there is still plenty of room for optimism. All of the advanced metrics for the New England Patriots are up with Drake Maye under center. Points per game, explosive play percentage, EPA per dropback, so Maye has shown he can rise to the occasion. If he continues to add fantasy points with his legs as well, he could be a sneaky top 12 quarterback rest of season should his play continue to improve. I'm willing to take the upside shot on the rookie here and stash him down the home stretch, especially if you need to find options to replace a guy like Dak Prescott. Another wide receiver to consider stashing this week is Jalen Coker of the Carolina Panthers, who's rostered in 8% of leagues. After going for 17.8 fantasy points in Week 8, then underwhelming in Week 9, Coker reminded us why there's still room for optimism in Week 10. He led all Panthers wide receivers in targets while drawing a 32% target share and ran a route on 89% of Bryce Young's dropbacks. That was still less than his counterpart Xavier Legette, but who else is it going to be in this Carolina Panthers offense? Adam Thielen did just return off IR this week, but the Panthers are essentially eliminated from playoff contention. Why not see what you have in your young assets like Jalen Coker? Most managers aren't thinking about Coker since he's on bye this week, and he even gets the Cowboys, Cardinals, Falcons, and Bucks twice in 5 of the last 7 games of the season. In a deep league, it's worth taking the shot on Coker to see if anything comes from his increased role. Coming in next is Jaylen Wright of the Miami Dolphins, who's rostered in 6% of leagues. The tides are turning in the Dolphins' backfield, and it may actually be favoring Jaylen Wright. Devon Achane dominated the snaps on Monday Night Football against the Rams, but Wright and Mostert split snaps with Wright playing 9 to Mostert's 8. What's more shocking, though, is that Jaylen Wright was given 5 carries and Raheem Mostert didn't log a single tote. Mostert appeared to take a back seat after fumbling in Week 9, and that trend continued into Week 10. I mentioned this with Jaylen Wright last week as well. What's stopping the Dolphins from giving Wright more reps down the stretch? There's little need to run the brakes off of Raheem Mostert, and he may not even be in the team's future plans with an out in his contract after this season. Once again, this is the time of year where we stash high-value handcuffs, and if anything were to happen to Devon Achane, Jaylen Wright should see a healthy uptick in usage. If you're filtering through tight ends and need another option, consider stashing Will Dissly of the Los Angeles Chargers, who's rostered in only 2% of leagues. I know this is really gross, but here's a fact that might actually blow your mind. Over the last 4 weeks, Will Dissly is tied for 6th in targets and tied for 5th in receptions of all tight ends. Now, I completely understand that hasn't come too much. He's finished as a tight end 7, tight end 21, tight end 36, and the tight end 18 in those games, but his rest of season schedule is absolutely money. 7 of the final 8 teams he plays are top 13 in fantasy points given up to the position this year, and of those 7, 5 of them are top 8 in fantasy points allowed to the position. With how well Justin Herbert has been slinging it recently, Dissly becomes an intriguing deep league option, so if you want a tight end dart throw, Will Dissly certainly isn't your worst option. Our last wide receiver stash of the week is John Metchie of the Houston Texans, who's rostered in only 1% of leagues. We might be chasing a lone week of production here, but you could certainly do worse than John Metchie on this Houston Texans offense. In Week 10, he finished as the wide receiver 8 overall, hauling in 5 of his 6 targets for 74 yards and a score. He now draws a date with the Dallas Cowboys in Week 11, who have been struggling against wide receivers as of late. They've given up the 10th most points to the position over the last 4 weeks. I also completely understand Nico Collins will be returning to the lineup, which may nuke Metchie's value entirely. But if you've got a spare roster spot and want to see if lightning strikes twice, it's not the worst idea to see Metchie's potential through for another week. Last but not least, for all of you playing in leagues where you start a defense and special teams unit, you can look to stash the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are rostered in only 15% of leagues. None of your league mates will even be thinking about the Bucs defense at this point because they're on bye this week. Not only is this unit a great stash for Week 12 when they play the New York Football Giants, but they're a great stash rest of season. After the Giants, they get the Panthers twice, the Raiders, the Dak Prescott-less Dallas Cowboys, and the Saints in 6 of their final 7 games. This might be a unit that other managers are trying to target 2 to 3 weeks from now, but you'll beat them to the punch by stashing them on their bye week when no one is expecting it. Alrighty, y'all, that's it. That's all I've got for you here today, but before we sign off, remember, you can take the guesswork out of waiver wire decisions with FantasyPros Waiver Assistant. It will give you instant analysis on potential moves from over 100 fantasy experts. You'll also discover both the weekly and rest of season impact for every waiver ad. All you have to do is visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Again, all you have to do, visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app to optimize your roster today.